Hello all. I know that people are still entering the room and loading up the chat with extraordinary indications of who we are and where we are coming from now. I would like to pause and welcome you with the words of one of my co-organizers of the Coalition for Action in Higher Education, Jason Was. If you are here, you are now part of a national network that we will strengthen and expand over the coming months. And adapting a resounding message that Devarian Baldwin made on the Scholars for Social Justice call earlier today, you are the power we have been waiting for. So again, welcome. I'm Heather Ferguson, the Coalition for Action in Higher Ed steering representative for this session, along with Kareem Matar. And we welcome you to the capstone of a day of action in which all of you publicly enacted our shared commitment to free higher education now. From debt and austerity governance practices, from carceral tactics deployed against our colleagues and students, from coercive control by boards of governors and trustees, from the collapse of academic freedom in the face of anti-war protests and commitments to end a genocide, and from the refusal to center humanity and seek empowerment through our shared commitments to knowledge as a liberatory path to justice. And we did all this in the face of a terrifying turn of the long-practiced draconian exercise of US imperialist and authoritarian actions in the global South, exerted now on the global North. So this teach-in refuses the defensive crouch and honors your creative resistance in the face of newly weaponized forces of suppression. In over 186, I think more at this point, and in at least 47 states, including flashpoints of repression coast to coast, you adopted wall-to-wall organizing via acts of collective solidarity. You held anti-fascist office hours, art for freedom poster sessions, watch parties, rally-ins and rally-outs, public readings and teach-ins, know your rights training sessions, flash mobs, and more. Tonight, the members of this teach-in are here to uplift the mobilizing power of academic rank-and-file workers, to build and even escalate as we face ever graver dangers, to embrace our firm belief that our best protection is collective solidarity, and to reflect together about the relationship between local, community-based actions and the national orgs that we are members of. I am speaking to you from the Claremont Consortium and from varied roles in my local AAUP chapter in AUP AFT 6741 as an associate professor of Middle East and Ottoman history and as a participant in shared actions with other knowledge workers committed to Palestine. My friend and comrade, Kareem Matar, will aid in facilitating our Q&A session, and he is located at the University of Colorado Boulder, is an associate professor of English, and a member of the Coalition for Action in Higher Ed Steering Collective. We take this moment to thank our organizing partners, including HELU, the Debt Collective, Labor Notes, MESA, and AUP, all represented here today on this call. I will take a few moments to briefly introduce all of the extraordinary panelists today, and then turn it over to each of them for approximately 8 minutes each. The order in which I will introduce them is key. It represents the ground-up approach to organizing that the Day of Action itself embodies, as we move from a single academic workplace to departments, institutes, councils, coalitions, task forces, and national orgs. Join me then in welcoming the panelists here today.
Heather, I just wanted to make sure you saw the comments in the chat that your audio, we could understand you mostly, but every once in a while it was a little fuzzy.
Okay. Is this better?
Much better, thank you.
I should have done that long ago. It was such a resounding speech. Do you want me to start? Anyway, it doesn't matter because all of you are here. I'm so sorry. I couldn't see the chat while I had so many windows open. But anyway, I don't even matter because who matters here today is you, which is what I was saying, and all of the panelists here today. So I'm going to introduce them just briefly and then turn it over to them. We'll start off with Leila Kawar is a Palestinian American scholar from the University of Michigan, key and active in range of grassroots movements with faculty, staff, and student initiatives, associate professor in the Department of American Culture and in the Residential College, and is vice president of the Ann Arbor chapter of the AAUP. She will be followed by Sean Malloy, who's a professor of history and critical race and ethnic studies at the University of California, Merced. He's a member of the UC Ethnic Studies Council, the UC People's Tribunal for Palestine, and on the founding collective of the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism. He will then be followed by Kathy Cohen, the inaugural chair of the new Department of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity, and professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Chicago. She is also co-founder and on the executive committee of Scholars for Social Justice, as well as being a member of FSJP, AAUP, and the More Than Diversity campaign at the University of Chicago. Barbara Madeloni is an organizer with Labor Notes, where she works with higher education workers looking to grow more democratic, rank-and-file militant unions. Prior to her work at Labor Notes, she was the president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association. Levin Kim is a PhD candidate at the University of Washington and chair of Higher Education Labor United. Lara Deeb is the co-chair of the Middle East Studies Association's Task Force on Civil and Human Rights, as well as a member of the association's board of directors and its Committee on Academic Freedom. She is a professor of anthropology and Middle Eastern and North African studies at Scripps College in Claremont, California. And finally, Todd Wolfson is an associate professor in the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at Rutgers University. As we all know, Todd is currently president of the American Association of University Professors, a national vice president for the American Federation of Teachers, and for the last 6 years has been in leadership of the Rutgers Academic Workers Union, where in 2023 helped lead a strike of 10,000 workers of 3 unions at Rutgers. So with no further ado, I am turning it over to Leila Kawar to start us off.
Thanks so much, Heather. I'm here today to offer some thoughts on the dynamics of higher education in our political moment and on how we can organize a response. I do so from the perspective of University of Michigan faculty who've been organizing to defend our university and our students against unprecedented attacks. The initiatives I've been a part of are very much a grassroots effort, so I'm not here speaking on behalf of any organization or network, but I'm grateful to several wonderful staff and faculty colleagues for feedback on what I am saying. I'm joining you from Southeast Michigan. As historians might recall, during the Second World War, this part of the world became known as the arsenal of democracy. According to the Detroit Historical Society, by the summer of 1944, Ford's Willow Run plant was completing one B-24 bomber every hour. In the words of UAW President Walter Reuther, like England's battles were won on the playing fields of Eton, America's were won on the assembly lines of Detroit. Today, in many ways, this country looks different. Its role as an arsenal now includes supplying technology and materials for an assault on Gaza that many consider to be unjust. And in this country, Black and Brown students are obtaining degrees from the state of Michigan's flagship research university in increasing numbers. And joined by their fellow Jewish American, Asian American, and many other students, they are passionately organizing to end this unjust war in which they see the US military-industrial complex and their own universities as complicit. Indeed, this changing face of higher education in the United States was captured at the University of Michigan's commencement ceremony just 1 year ago. And so now I'm going to switch and share. Go. One second. Okay. So last May, on the playing fields of UM's championship football team, Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro, was one of the commencement speakers, and he referred to Michigan as the arsenal of democracy and celebrated the university as a powerhouse of US industry. But the Secretary of the Navy and the other graduation speakers, as well as university regents and officials who sat on the platform behind them, were upstaged. Graduating students wearing keffiyehs and waving flags rose up in the middle of the ceremony in a collective expression of solidarity with their peers in Gaza. And it was these students' hope-filled faces that were captured in an iconic image on the front page of the Sunday New York Times the following morning. So after foregrounding that Sunday front page image in May 2024, let me try and fill in briefly what came before and what came after. Many of these images and headlines are taken from the campus coverage of the Michigan Daily, whose student reporting, in my view, has been consistently high caliber and also much better in my experience than state or national coverage of campus. Here are two articles that the Daily published in the fall of 2023. On the left is an image of the Night of Remembrance held on October 21st. On the right is an image 1 month later showing police blocking students from entering the university's administration building. According to the Daily, about 300 students had gathered that Friday afternoon on the Diag, which is our main quad in Central Campus, for a pro-Palestine rally. As they had done 2 weeks earlier, they marched from the Diag to the Rutgers building, but this time the public building was closed without notice during normal work hours, and at least 25 police vehicles, some armed with riot shields, had arrived before the march reached the building. Through the long Michigan winter of the 2023-24 school year, UM's student-led pro-Palestine coalition, which called itself the Tahrir or Liberation Coalition, continued to seek a meeting with University President Santa Ono, which he never granted, and continued to organize actions that sought to disrupt the status quo in campus life in order to direct attention to the ongoing attack on Gaza. There was a sense of urgency because Palestinian University of Michigan students were losing dozens of family members in the Israeli bombings. In April, inspired by their peers at Columbia, University of Michigan students created their own encampment on our Diag. And this brings me then to a period of backlash and repression. 2.5 weeks after that spring commencement in the Big House, on Tuesday, May 21st, in the early morning hours, campus police forced the clearing of the Gaza Solidarity encampment on our Diag. Students were pepper sprayed, tents were plowed by heavy equipment. Police arrested 4 protesters. Dana Nessel, Michigan State Attorney General, then stepped in, or arguably was asked to step in, to file criminal charges in a move which some regents supported, but which the ACLU of Michigan found concerning and unprecedented. Nessel announced the decision to prosecute in September. There were also changes made to internal university policies. With no public notice, over the summer, the Board of Regents enacted changes to student disciplinary processes, revised the campus facilities use policy, hired consultants to pursue disciplinary complaints against protesters, and the university would go on to ban dorm room door decorations and using a consultant to effectuate the suspension of our chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine. Students engaging in peaceful protests on campus this past academic year faced more heavy-handed police responses, as well as surveillance and campus bans, and additional criminal charges were brought in early January related to a die-in protest in late August, where students read out the names of children under 1 year old killed in Gaza. The repression of student protests was also being used as a pretext for attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. Individual regents made statements about an approaching, quote, moment of reckoning for DEI programming at the university. And external critics of DEI found a public platform in a series of problematic feature-length articles that the New York Times ran about University of Michigan. As a further development in December, a Democratic Party regent was personally involved in the firing of a staff director in UM's DEI office, whose presence and support of students at the pro-Palestine die-in action was identified as one rationale for her employment termination. And when speaking at an event hosted by the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, earlier this semester, University President Santa Ono not only defended the staff member's termination, but also ominously suggested in response to a question that tenured UM faculty might face the same fate. Since February, the Trump administration's weaponization of cuts or threatened cuts to federal funding for university research programs has made things worse in every way. On March 27th, less than a month ago, an all-university email titled "Evolving Our Approach to DEI" announced the decision to shut down all UM DEI programs following leadership and board discussions. The announcement stated, "Conversations about these institutional efforts have been ongoing since at least 2023, With recent federal executive orders, guidance, and funding cuts bringing urgency to the issue, we are moving forward with changes. These included the closure of the university's Office of DEI, termination of existing DEI programming effective immediately. In addition, the Office of General Counsel would initiate an expedited review of all policies, programs, and practices to ensure their, quote, compliance with federal guidance. And all units would be required to evaluate their web presence to, quote, reflect the status of current programmatic directions. And just last week, University HR suspended and then formally terminated a young academic staff member for participating 11 months earlier as a graduating student in a pro-Palestine protest in which students gathered spontaneously outside the University Art Museum, where a reception was taking place for regents and invited speakers on the eve of the spring commencement in the big house that you just saw a picture of. So summing up the state of where we are now, here's a quote from a retired staff member who was interviewed by the Michigan Daily after attending a rally last week on the Diag calling for UM to reinstate DI programming. Speaking about university leaders, she said, apparently the current administration just thinks their job is to cave right now and prematurely capitulate to what Trump might ask of them. And it's a damn shame because students deserve better. So just to close, I have a couple thoughts briefly. First, in the short term, in order to confront attacks meaningfully and indeed to build the higher education system that better promotes our values, we need university officials to move away from leading with fear. Leading with fear is not what faculty want right now. There needs to be a decisive shift away from the current combination of defensive posturing and what one colleague has termed reverse benchmarking that is not only ineffective in the face of an administration bent on destroying higher ed, but also betrays core values. And secondly, this is an opportunity to advance a more inclusive vision of higher education. When I think about a higher education system that we need for a just and sustainable world, one core aspect has to be its inclusivity. The big house at Michigan or its equivalents elsewhere should not be reserved for donors in the skyboxes, frat boys in the stands. It belongs just as much to members of the multiracial, multi-religious student movement who stood in solidarity with Gaza at their graduation last May as a way of making the playing field their own. Universities can do better than operating as technical or military arsenals for so-called democracies. Instead, they should aim to model what it means to be a truly inclusive and equitable democracy for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Leila, so much for starting us off from the extraordinary work that you're doing within the context of University of Michigan, embodying all of the principles that we all reach for. Up next is Sean Malloy. Take it away, Sean.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to all of the organizers for today's events, particularly to Heather and Kareem, who have been truly superhuman. And not just today, but I see you in so many other spaces, and you are doing such amazing work. I also want to acknowledge that today is not only the anniversary of the Columbia encampment, but also Palestinian Prisoners' Day, in which we stand in solidarity with the some 10,000 Palestinian detainees held in Israeli jails and military custody. Bringing things a little bit closer to home, I want to start with a story that illustrates for me some of the limits of the more traditional forms of faculty governance, particularly when it comes to defending the university and our values, and then move on to quickly talk about some alternative ways to organize around that goal. This is a story that begins in mid-March as the Trump administration began to ramp up its assault on higher education. And in the midst of this, the president of the 10-campus University of California system, Michael V. Drake, called an emergency meeting of the UC Academic Council, which is the system-wide faculty governing body. He began that meeting by saying that we need to, quote, find things that we can do to indicate to them, meaning the Trump administration, that we are hearing their message, end quote. He then went on to talk about how we needed to be, quote, moving towards a better understanding with this administration, end quote. And as an example of the concessions that the UC would be preemptively offering, he said that the university would be outlawing the use of diversity statements in hiring, a policy that was, in fact, formally announced 2 days later in the midst of a UC Regents meeting. The entire meeting with the UC president lasted only an hour, And while faculty present were allowed to voice our opinions, it was quite clear at the time that this matter had already been decided by the regents and the president, and that we were not being consulted, but rather informed. On top of that, the president insisted that all of the things he had just told us about UC's preemptive surrender, as well as the reasoning behind it, had to remain confidential. And I open with this story because I think it reveals a couple of important things. First, it nicely illustrates some of the major weaknesses and trade-offs associated with traditional forms of faculty governance. Because while the UC has among the most robust implementations of shared governance within the US university system, here in this moment of crisis, we were given essentially no say or even meaningful input. And the price that we paid to be in the room and listen to the president lay out plans for preemptive surrender was that we had to promise not to tell anybody about it, rendering us essentially complicit as a body, as a faculty body in that surrender. For me personally, that was too much of an ask. And so after the meeting, I went and I leaked the president's comments to a number of reporters, and then was subsequently asked politely to resign from the academic council. And I am no longer a member of that body. There's a second revealing thing about this meeting, though, and that is a phrase that President Drake used to describe the university's strategy. He said that he had been advised by his political contacts in Washington that the UC should, quote, not be the tallest nail. And he repeated that on a number of occasions in a way that indicated he agreed with this advice, which basically amounted to saying that the UC should remain quiet and obedient and hope that the blow fell on others who were more visible to the new administration. This is essentially applying to the entire UC system, the old adage that I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. And it perfectly indicates the attitude of a university managerial class, a class that contains no small number of faculty, for whom self-preservation at all costs is the order of the day in times of crisis. And while I don't want to dismiss traditional faculty governance at the UC or at any place that still has it, it's a time of crisis and we need to lay our hands on all the levers of power that we can. But while I have devoted well over a decade of my career to active service in the academic senate, I am now convinced that as a body, it will never be able to truly defend the university, much less transform it into the kind of institution that reflects the values that I want to see in the world. So I want to close with a couple of words about some forms of organizing that I've been involved with that give me much more hope. Outside of the academic senate, the UC has faculty associations and a system-wide council of faculty associations, or CUFA, which has been doing some great work in pushing back both against the Trump administration and the UC administration. But for me, honestly, the most powerful and rewarding work takes place when we step outside our narrow roles as faculty and organize collectively with students, staff, and community members. So I'm a member of the UC Ethnic Studies Council, as well as the UC People's Tribunal for Palestine. You can see my background. These are two different groups. One is focused on supporting ethnic studies education and anti-imperialist work more broadly. The other focuses on exposing and documenting the complicity of UC leaders in genocide and ongoing Nakba in Palestine. One thing they have in common, though, is a commitment to solidarity, mutual respect, and organizing outside the traditional channels and silos that the university uses to contain us. I'm a very firm believer in the old adage, organize where you are. And where many of us are is the academy, and so that's where we're organizing. But I think in organizing within the academy, we need to be very careful not to replicate the hierarchical, oppressive, and sometimes literally medieval structures that characterize this institution. I think we've all seen examples of faculty members who have impeccable politics in their publications or on their social media accounts and take the most radical possible positions on matters where they have little or no actual power to affect change. But in the one area where they do have some control, in the way they treat staff members, students, or junior colleagues on their own campuses, they can be the most petty of petty tyrants. I think we all have seen examples of that, and frankly, we need to do better as faculty, and that means exploring ways of organizing that disrupt the traditional hierarchies that characterize the university. That is not to say there isn't a place for organizing within our existing university communities, right? Whether that is unions, whether it's faculty or staff associations, faculty or student governments, or any bodies that address the particular interests and concerns of a group of community members. But if we want to build the strength to not just defend the university, but to transform it into something more than just a neoliberal fortress of knowledge production, then we need to be ready to experiment with forms of organization and solidarity that reflect the values that we want to see in the world. Because when the hammer comes, as it has, we need to be ready to stand tall together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, so much to remind us that organizing where we are should not replicate the systems that have oppressed and repressed us, or those that we consider to be those we fight for. So up next, we have Kathy. Take it away.
Great. First, I just want to thank the organizers of this panel, but also everyone who curated all the activities throughout the day. I am truly grateful for those who stepped up to remind us of the need to kind of resist and do our work collectively and in solidarity. I'm here representing Scholars for Social Justice, an organization committed to mobilizing the knowledge, skills, and resources of scholars in and out of the academy to battle repressive attacks on marginalized communities, advancing instead an agenda of equity, justice, and freedom. So I'm going to take my time to just talk a little bit about how we or I understand this moment and what we must do. So like authoritarian leaders and strong men before him, Trump has set his sights on higher education because he understands, I think sometimes in ways we do not always recognize, the power of the institution and the infrastructure. Most, if not authoritarian leaders, know that if you control higher education and K through 12 classrooms, you can control the histories that people learn. You can erase or at least attempt to reconstruct the ways histories of white settler colonialism, slavery, and empire are told or not told. You can constrain the teaching of critical thinking and liberatory knowledge. And most importantly, you can socialize generations into submission and adherence. In the United States, we are confronted with Trump and his cronies who are centering, and I want to be clear, race through the language of critical race studies, DEI, and wokeism, as well as anti-Semitism in their frontal attack on higher education. Chris Rufo, one of the chief architects of Trump's attack on higher education, notes that many on the right have long been aware of what they consider to be the ideological corruption of the academy, made most visible for them in its promotion of what he calls racialized theories and practices. He suggests that for a long time, Americans, however, could just ignore those ideas. But it was in the mobilizations of 2020 in response to the murder of George Floyd, when the right witnessed people moving into the street, that they realized the possible systemic disruption that the liberatory theories, research, and praxis coming out of some segments of the academy, such as Black studies, gender and sexuality studies, indigenous studies, and Middle Eastern studies, was then that they realized the systemic disruption these ideas could produce. Rufo, however, was clear that it was not just the ideas that we were generating that was the problem, but the way, as he recalls, and I quote, those ideas escaped the laboratory of the academy, end quote, and were embraced by capitalism. He describes how the ideas that some would label critical race theory or the policies thought to animate DEI programs were suddenly, and I'm going to quote again, in your kids' school curriculum, it was in your HR training, it was in your television news program, and you have this sudden coherence of a replacement narrative about America, about our history, about our people, about our culture, about our politics, end quote. So let's be clear, it was seeing people move into the streets in 2020 and the collective power of those people to embrace liberatory narratives that refocus the attention of the right on the academy. And I say refocus because, in fact, we know that there have been many instances of attempted takeover or radical purgings of the academy historically. But generally, the right has been willing to live with higher ed and its controlled sites or departments of opposition, because the segmentation of power, emphasis on power, in higher ed aligns with racial hierarchy. Most or nearly all trustees, presidents, provosts, deans, professors, and students are white in higher ed. So the Trojan horse of complaints about the takeover of DEI and left ideological control of campuses is just that, a Trojan horse. The right sees its war on the academy and education in general as part of a generational war over what young people, especially young white people, will be taught and how they will be socialized. And of course, the dismantling of the academy using critical race theory and DEI as their kind of frontal attack was never enough. So they also mobilized claims of rampant anti-Semitism and threats to safety to justify the imposition of policies meant to end student protests in general, and especially the protests against the genocide in Gaza. Trump is using the cover of anti-Semitism and the deployment of executive orders to expand his power and to undermine the rights of his opposition, demanding that universities punish students, staff, and faculty who fought for an end to the genocide in Gaza, while the government now embarks on a strategy of disappearing international students who dare to stand with the Palestinian people. And we should be clear, Trump is prepared to take a wrecking ball to the academy and will live with the collateral damage of stopping and or privatizing research on cancer or Alzheimer's or climate change to ensure that the higher education sector is remade to reflect white supremacist ideological viewpoints and commitments. One need only read the administration's demands to Harvard, where they seek to control the standards of hiring and promotion, to change the process of admissions, to insist on audits and surveillance by the government, and to reduce the power of students, untenured faculty, and what they say administrators and tenured faculty more committed to activism than scholarship. And now to top it off, we see they are pursuing a consent decree with Columbia University. So as we move forward and continue our resistance, we have to remember the centrality of race, of Palestine, and of white supremacy to our understanding of this generational war. There will be those who suggest that the critical issue for us is that of academic freedom or faculty governance, critically important issues. But this attack on the university is about the longevity of white supremacy in higher education and this country. So, okay, as we move forward, we have to think about how we must resist. First, we have to make the space, as everyone else has already said, to both defend the work of the universities, but also to reimagine how they function. Trump has already taken the lead in reimagining the university, and now we must catch up. We have to understand the reach of universities that include controlling jobs, healthcare, schools, and policing, as detailed by DeVarian Baldwin. Our people actually know the reach of the university. We now need to talk to our colleagues about it. Therefore, we must organize on campuses and across our campuses to control all the resources of universities. That means we have to talk to colleagues we normally would not. We have to do one-on-ones with folks in and out of the university about the issues that are important to them. When talking to a colleague, we may need to start with the topic of faculty governance or the threatened deportation of students in their labs and move on from there. As Trump seeks to shrink the sector, we have to make a claim for providing more access to our folks who want a college education. As Trump asks students and families to take on more debt to go to college, we have to demand that more colleges are free for the public. As Trump seeks to control administrators, we have to demand the expanding access and power for faculty, students, staff, and community members. We have to understand that those people need to be on our board of trustees. And we also have to think about how we would use the endowments that some institutions have to expand access to higher education for our people. We also, and this is touchy, have to hold accountable, right, those spaces we control on college campuses, or kind of control. We have to ask more from Middle Eastern studies, African American studies, gender and sexuality studies, gender and sexuality centers and departments, at this moment. And I say this as the chair of a Department of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity at the University of Chicago. So yes, I'm going to stop because I'm sure I'm over. Our work in this moment is to resist Trump and his attacks to capture higher education. But our other work has to be based in our vision of what we want higher ed to be, how we want our people to control this sector. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I mean, so much in there, everyone, and especially how we must reimagine our universities and be fighting, and the ground from which we should be fighting, that is reparative, abolitionist, and liberatory. Moving on now to Barbara.
Hi, thank you, Heather. And thank you to CAHE and the organizers for putting together this day of action. I'm really honored to be on a panel with all of you. I want to actually sort of talk a little bit about what I've been learning as I'm actually writing an article about the Day of Action and interested in how CAHE came to be and what I'm learning about that in terms of organizing in this moment. So the first thing is really clear to all of us and has been made clear again, like we are organizing against like really powerful and dangerous forces. And there is a certain, there's an urgency to the moment that we need to attend to, that the danger is present. The danger is not imagined, and it's present in more spaces. The danger, of course, has always been present for some of us. It is now present for more of us, and as individuals and as the institution of higher education. But we're really not prepared in many ways to have the capacity and power to take on the level of urgency and the powerful forces that are against us. And I think that's like a dilemma that we've all been struggling with. How do we access the power that we need in this moment when we don't have that power? And how do we balance our urgency with the need to actually build power? What does it look like to take every step that we have to take and take it more quickly, but still to take the steps that we need to organize? As Kathy was talking, having those one-to-one conversations. We can't skip those steps. And so what does it mean to organize in the midst of this crisis? And to do that as deeply democratically as possible, because I'm convinced that how we organize and fight and win is integral to what we build. That the vision of the world that we want needs to be a part of how we organize, of how we come together, of how we welcome people. And so how do we do that in a moment of urgency is the question that faces us. And I've been really sort of moved actually by CAHE and the organizing that you've done as, I think, an umbrella, as a model for others in the labor movement, other workers, other communities, for how we can begin to think about taking on this moment. You did something sort of magical with the tagline, free higher education. Because I don't know, free can be a verb, free can be an adjective. You can take that up in whatever way you want. And so there's a broad umbrella in that, and yet it's focused. It's not a list of demands, but it is a vision for what is possible that we can all enter and say, what do we want with that? And I think that's really important when there are so many attacks in so many places that invite us to isolate and pick up our issue and fight just around our issue, that you've really helped to say, this is a space where we are connecting our issues. And part of that connection is not just what we are fighting against, but what we are fighting for. And that has brought more people in. And then when we're fighting for something, we also recognize what's getting in the way of us having what we want. And that's when we fight against. But we're always moving toward the horizon of the world that we want. And I think the free higher education is such a beautiful way to do that. You've also, and again, I'm thinking of this in terms of lessons we can learn about organizing broadly. You've created enough structure to hold people and to guide people, and not so much structure that people are constrained. And so we need both of those in our organizing. We need enough structure and guidance, and then we need a place for communities of people and workers to come together and say, this is what we're going to pick up here, and this is how we're going to organize around this. And I think the model of your organizing, in that the balance of structure and a little bit of chaos and uncertainty, some might call it flexibility, is important and actually like critical. And I've seen that happen in other successful campaigns, that you have both of those happening at the same time. And because of that, and because you've dug down into like, go here, go do the work that you want to do. Come fight for free higher education on your campus in a way that makes sense for you. And there's such a broad range of activities. You've made a place for people to actually grow the relationships that are central to the solidarity that we're going to need for this long fight. So you've created that. I was on a call yesterday with a workshop with people that were talking about how rallies are great, but you tend not to actually meet people and relate to people at rallies. There's a certain level of solidarity that comes out of a rally, but it's not the same as sitting down in a teach-in and problem solving together. It's not the same of talking through an issue that you have on campus. Rallies are an important part of our work, but they're strongest when they represent solidarity that we built and solidarity in relationships. And so the structure of this day of action and the work that you've been doing allows for a place for that to happen. And I think those relationships are key. Things are going to get harder. We need people to be in relationship and have been solving problems together. Problems like, what do we want to have on the teaching program? Problems like, how should we get the artwork going for this? So we can say art fights fascism. Working together in direct action in relationship is key to the foundation that we need to build where we're going. And in that is that we create the spaces that we, as organizers, and that we certainly as educators, we create liberatory spaces where workers, students come to know themselves in ways that capitalism has otherwise denied us. So when we're problem solving on our campuses about how we're going to use those resources, about how we're going to have a voice, we are, and doing that collectively, we are creating the experience. It's why they're so scared of education, public education, is that education at its best does that same thing. It creates a space where we know ourselves and each other in ways that are denied by capitalism. As organizers, that's what we're doing. And that's how we are building the world that we want in the process of fighting for the world that we want. Those go together. So I think that's like, those are just the pieces of your organizing that I want you to sort of attend to, that I want us to all attend to, not just in higher ed, but more broadly. Just a few more sort of questions going forward that are really big questions. I've been impressed by the conversations about escalation, understanding that this is not a one-off event. And I think we want to spend some real time thinking about, like, so what does escalation look like? I think we need to go back to our campuses to think about that, to do assessments locally. What did you learn about where people are at, what they're ready to do? How are we bringing people together to think about and make their own decisions about the next step? And then how do we connect those escalating events and keep things connected, not only within CAHE, not only across campuses, but how are we going to reach out to other unions, to other workers, has been mentioned, so that we're doing this same work in a variety of different spaces, and then we are cohering into the collective power that we're going to need, because we're going to need a lot of power, but we have to walk our way there. I kept thinking of the Bruce Cockburn song, Slow Down Fast, today, but I actually think what I needed in my head was fast, slow, not slow, fast. We have to figure out how to do that. And the other thing I just sort of want to mention in terms of unions as a space for this work that I really believe is really important. We probably wouldn't be here with CAHE exactly as we are if it weren't for the reform leaders that were elected to 6741 and to Todd being elected president of AAUP. Like I want to sort of name that that's part of the history of getting here. And so when we're looking at our unions and we're thinking about how can we move our unions, that leadership is going to matter, and leadership that is focused on transforming the union is a really important piece of that. And history should note that as this movement grows. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for reminding us of so many things, including that how we organize is part of what we build, and to build relational organizing in spaces that has been denied to us by capitalism, and to go back to our campuses to think about how we escalate further. I am now turning it over to Levin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Levin. I use they, them pronouns. I am the president of UAW Local 4121. We represent 8,000 academic workers at the University of Washington in Seattle, Tacoma, and Bonneville. This includes graduate workers like myself, undergraduate student workers, as well as full-time postdoctoral researchers and full-time research staff and engineers as well. Our local 4121 has existed for the last 20 years, and I first got involved in our local during the first Trump administration, or Trump 1.0. It was during this time when I had just moved to Seattle. It was my 13th year as an international student. I'm still an international student now. And it was during this time that I was trying to get to know this new city in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of uprisings, for racial justice, that I found our union through a weekly email. And in the email, I was really searching for a space as an international student who often gets read as Asian American and identifies with the politics of many influential critical Asian American studies scholars. But at the same time, I was really going through an existential moment where I was questioning my relationships to power, my relationships to the US state, my relationships to the higher education institutions that facilitate my existence in the States and that bring me a lot of privilege in being able to study these ideas and build the world that I want. However, I've also felt a lot of limitations in being able to understand how power works at my workplace, and also beyond as well, as someone who doesn't have voting rights in the country, for someone who doesn't have structural access to political power. And for me, becoming involved in my union through one-to-one organizing is the way that I found my political voice. As an international student right now in this moment I've heard the phrase that we're in unprecedented times countless times over the last couple of months, as I'm sure many of you have as well. But I want to frame this moment under a slightly different lens, which is that we're seeing how universities and the infrastructure that the higher ed in the United States is working exactly as it should and exactly as it was designed to be. In particular, I look at the period after the 9/11 attacks, when the CIVIS database that we hear so much about right now was first installed, and since then we've seen the U.S. government through different administrations sharpen the tools to be able to surveil and make targets out of different bodies along racial, class, and gender lines. And to do this in a more covert and oftentimes more insidious way. What we're seeing play out with all of the attacks on international students right now is, in fact, not an aberration because we're under the Trump administration, but exactly how the system was designed to work. The system of higher education in the United States has always been inextricably entangled with the infrastructures around immigration, infrastructures around border control, the violence that accompanies all of these things, the infrastructures to control worker movements, infrastructures to control student movements. And so higher education has always been involved in the management of and disciplining of these bodies into subjects for the American state. So with that framing, I wanted to go back to my story of how I got involved in our union, Local 4121, to bring that back to the importance of what Kathy and Barbara were pointing to, the importance of one-to-one organizing. Our local, Local 4121, is named 4121 because our local has a really proud tradition of being grounded in one-to-one organizing and being grounded in the power that one-to-one organizing builds. To me, one-to-one organizing is the tool and the no shortcuts, as they say, the tool that allows us to connect with each other across the labels and across the relationships that the university gives us. Through the frame of one-to-one organizing and building power and learning to speak the language of power together through constant struggle, being able to take escalating risks together and to be able to understand how the language of power and the language of money is shaping our experiences as workers on a campus because of these one-to-one conversations that I've been able to find ways of relating to the campus in a way that foregrounds my agency in all of this, rather than being the subject of oppression or being cast as the most vulnerable. As Barbara was mentioning, in doing this, a hugely important role in being able to cultivate these kinds of spaces is having strong organizing spaces in our unions and also in our collective organizing spaces that bring unions together, like Higher Education Labor United. In my own union, I've been fortunate to be led by leaders and by organizers that really taught me the value of one-to-one organizing and of building structures where as many workers as possible that are engaging with higher education through the lens of capitalism, because that is a society we're in, have the direct experience of winning, have the direct experience of participating in a winning campaign, whether that's something like a contract campaign that you win against your boss, or whether that boss that you're fighting against is the federal government, or in some cases like my own, the state government and the people in power that control the resources and the support that we all need. And in figuring out these questions together, the importance of one-to-one organizing in understanding the lived realities that we are all contending with, and to be able to identify the common experiences that we all have, and to be able to build organizing spaces that support each other and also center in meaningful ways the leadership of those of us who are most impacted by these systems. We're able to build structures, not for the sake of building structures, but to take on the way that higher education is working exactly as it has been and exactly how it was always designed to work, and to build a new system of higher education. But without waiting for it to fall, we can do that right now. In the organizing spaces that I've been with our local, as well as with Higher Labor United, these are the spaces where I've seen these glimmers of hope. And over the last couple of months, we're also seeing, in a time of great crisis, how by coming together, we are able to lead in this moment. I want to underscore that we are having a couple of, over the last week, we're seeing a couple of our universities starting to follow our lead as a movement. I don't think it's an accident that over the last week, Harvard University has now taken a stand. But it's not because Harvard wants to do the right thing. It's because we as a movement have been leading the way, and they're finally following our lead. Just in the last week, we've seen reports of the critical funds to healthcare research at the NIH starting to be restored. This is not because the NIH is suddenly having a change of heart. This is not because the Trump administration is starting to listen. It's because we have been able to exert power and to be able to take on this fight in our own terms, by struggling with each other and by identifying where and by strategizing where we need to be focusing on right now to save the future of higher ed. And so with these wins, I think there are a couple of challenges that we must be ready to fight on and win, and also we must be strategizing to have a clear path forward. Right now, as we are reacting to the news of these elite institutions like Harvard, like MIT, starting to grow a backbone, we'll leave Columbia out of but maybe they were never mind. As we cannot fall into the trap of letting the Trump administration or letting the ruling class, the billionaire class, make this fight about higher ed and turn that into elites versus the working class. By celebrating Harvard and by saying that Harvard is, the institution that has the resources to go against the Trump administration, we are falling for that trap. We have a responsibility instead to take this moment for what it is and to set the agenda so that more of our institutions will follow that lead, so that each of and do what Barbara said, take this back to all of our campuses, make sure that we're not wasting this moment, but instead making all of our institutions challenge them to get in front of Harvard with us. Challenge them to be setting the agenda, challenge them to be actually listening to the workers and the students that make their university run. And to do that, we need to go back, as Kathy was saying, to one-to-one organizing, to identify strategic and smart demands at each of our campuses in a way that's flexible to what Barbara is saying, that knits together across all of our campuses into a unified vision that we're carrying out at each of our campuses, but also as a unified movement. And those are the kinds of places and environments that Higher Ed Labor United as a wall-to-wall, coast-to-coast formation is building. Higher Ed Labor United currently represents about 225,000 academic workers across job titles from coast to coast. These are spaces where faculty, both tenure track and non-tenured, graduate student workers like myself, undergraduate student workers, the maintenance and janitorial staff that are funded by indirect costs and a lot of the grants that are currently being cut are coming together to strategize and build the kinds of spaces that we want to see reflected in our universities. I'm really proud to be coming to this movement through my local union. When I first started my graduate career in 2019, at this point I'm in year 6, I, as an international student, didn't know what a union was, especially in the context of in the US. I was coming from a very different cultural context and a very different political context. During my union orientation, everyone else was signing cards, and I was like, okay, great, I'll sign a card. But in the 6 years since, being involved in our union with the focus on one-to-one organizing and the structures that allow us to recognize our own individual political agency, but then do the necessary work of transforming that individual collective agency into an exercise of exercising collective political agency. What that has taught me is that structure-based organizing in all of our workplaces has the radical transformative power of transforming us into a society that we want to see happen, and that we take this fight on by starting at our workplaces, starting with their coworkers, by engaging in hard conversations, to be able to build the structures together so that we're able to move forward together. And with that, I will close out and pass it off back to the room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Levin. Extraordinary, and a reminder, of course, that this call represents the united commitment for wall-to-wall organizing, but also that means like getting out of our kind of boxes and building with students, faculty, staff, and community organizers as well. And to remind us that the local is absolutely important for the visionary of an umbrella campaign, and that one-to-one will always save us to build power, and maybe power enough to get those like tricky Ivies to finally cave and realize that we potentially have a movement solidarity move forward. In any case, I am now handing it over to Lara.
All right, so first I just want to add my quick thanks to everyone who pulled this day together. I'm here, as Heather mentioned earlier, in my capacity as the co-chair of the Middle East Studies Association's Task Force on Civil and Human Rights. Our association president, Aslı Bâli, was supposed to be here, and you may have seen her on the program, but she was unable to join us for family reasons, so you've got me instead. I'm going to first say a few words about the long-standing centrality of Palestine to the attacks we're seeing on higher education, and then share some of the work that MESA has been doing. MESA is the academic association that has been at the forefront of these struggles for years because it is the associational home for so many scholars of the Middle East, quite of whom are also scholars from the region. Many, if not most of those academic freedom struggles have been related to Palestine. So as Kathy pointed out, they represent more than academic freedom struggles. So here are just a few examples. In 1969, the American Jewish Committee circulated a memo alleging that college campuses were the sites of an Arab propaganda campaign against Israel. And that memo set off an offensive to thwart the hiring of Palestinian and other Arab faculty, silence Palestinian perspectives, and prevent criticism of the Israeli state from appearing on campus events or curricula. That offensive expanded over time and brought multiple interest groups together, including the ADL, which in 1983 produced a black book of scholars accused of anti-Semitism because they criticized the Israeli state. So the weaponization of anti-Semitism we're seeing now is not new. They distributed that Black Book to campus leaders and asked them to monitor the listed professors. So those are two of the little-known precursors to the more widely known efforts that have targeted Mesa and its members, ranging from Campus Watch to Canary Mission. And of course, this has expanded recently with social media into mass-scale doxing of faculty and students and staff. Another example, in 1987, the people who came to be known as the LA 8 were detained on the grounds of a 1952 immigration law, the McCarran-Walter Act, that allowed the government to deport immigrants on ideological grounds. In 1952, the focus was on communism. In 1987, the LA 8, several of whom were student visa holders, were accused of association with a Palestinian political party. They were eventually released, exonerated, and allowed to remain in the US. That same 1952 law has now been invoked in relation to the detention and efforts to deport Mahmoud Khalil and presumably Mohsen Madawi, the two Columbia students and recent graduates. We also have to remember that the impact of the war on terror, as Levin just reminded us. So in 2002, for example, all non-citizen males from a list of Arab and Muslim countries were forced to undergo special registration with the US government. The Department of Homeland Security itself was created in 2002 as part of the war on terror. The targeting of Muslim communities and the increasingly aggressive enforcement strategies against them were deeply felt by academics from and working on the Middle East at that time too. When those strategies were further accelerated by the imposition of the so-called Muslim ban by Trump 1.0, as someone just put it, Mesa joined a lawsuit challenging that action all the way to the Supreme Court. And we, of course, shouldn't forget that what is happening today began under a different presidential administration, with the dragging of university presidents before Congress last year, and with a plethora of right-wing attacks on higher education that have been ongoing for years at the state level in relation to teaching race, gender, and sexuality. So we've long understood the connections between efforts to repress criticism of Israel and efforts to repress teaching and speech about settler colonialism, racism, police brutality, and incarceration here in the US. And we've also long seen material linkages between militarized policing here and there. What we're experiencing today is an intensification and broadening of these attacks. Palestine-related scholarship, teaching, and advocacy now represent one major focal point of an all-out, multi-agency and federal assault on institutions of higher education and on critical thinking and knowledge production in the US. Palestine is connected to federal funding cuts to higher education, not only in the threats of funding cuts to institutions, but also in cuts and potential cuts to area studies centers, scholarships for foreign language learning, programming, and research funding. Palestine is connected to attacks on teaching ethnic studies and critical race theory. We can't understand attacks on teaching about Israeli settler colonialism and racism outside the context of right-wing attacks on teaching about those subjects in the United States. Palestine is connected to the bludgeoning of academic freedom and free speech rights on campuses via that weaponization of accusations of anti-Semitism against those who criticize the Israeli state. Palestine is connected to racist police violence more broadly in the US through the violence deployed against students protesting the genocide in Gaza and through the ICE kidnapping of international students and scholars off the streets. And Palestine is connected to anti-immigration ideologies, policies, and practices through international student visa revocations and through these detentions and efforts to deport non-citizens. In at least some of those cases, visa holders are being targeted because they have been doxxed for their Palestine activism or due to their exercising their right to free expression on social media. So to wrap up, I want to return to Mesa, which again is the academic association alongside the AAUP that has been standing at the front line of defense today, as it has done in many earlier periods. Our primary goal has been to empower Mesa members, but also faculty, students, and staff more broadly, including in other fields and disciplines, with tools and information and resources. The task force that I'm co-chairing has an advocacy page, and I'll put that link in the chat when I'm done talking, where we've gathered some of the resources that we've vetted. We're also working in coalition with AAUP and other groups to track data about things like visa revocations, job loss, and Title VI cases, and other punitive measures against those who speak out on Palestine. So, for example, our tracking of visa revocations puts them at over 1,581 as of this morning, and that data should be publicly available in a couple weeks. Mesa's Committee on Academic Freedom has been especially busy over the past 18 and a half months, writing letters regularly to college and university administrations, calling on them to defend members of their community and affirm their free speech rights. And those letters are also available publicly, and I'll post that. Mesa is also one of the key plaintiffs, along with the AAUP and 3 AAUP campus chapters so far, including Harvard's, in the lawsuit AAUP versus Rubio, which the Knight Institute filed on March 25th. That suit challenges the Trump administration's policy of arresting, detaining, and deporting non-citizen students and faculty who participate in Palestine activism. Thus far, 2 amicus briefs have been filed in support of the case, one by 30 academic associations, and another by 86 universities and colleges that are part of something called the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. And finally, Mesa is a co-signatory to a filing that was sent to the United Nations Human Rights Council concerning the widespread human rights violations by the US government under both the Biden and the Trump administrations against speech and protest in defense of Palestinian rights. So that filing is both entering the empirical record of the US human rights review that takes place periodically, and it may create space for testimony to the Human Rights Council in Geneva, which would increase international attention to the massive repression that we're seeing right now. So all of this summed up is basically to say that MESA, the Middle East Studies Association, is fighting with us, with all of you, fighting with faculty, staff, and students across the country, not only within Middle East Studies, but beyond as well. So I will end with that, and I will put some of those links I mentioned in the chat.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for reminding us that we may be here in the present in 2025, but that goes back to 1952, 1987, 2001, now being redeployed and weaponized. And this intensification of assault on not just speech on Palestine, but on higher ed in general. Any program related to race, indigeneity, or just plain history of the US. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. And now we turn to Todd. Thank you so much, Todd. Take it away.
Hey, everyone. It's great to see you all. Thanks for having me. I'll just start out by saying it's an honor to be here with these amazing academics and organizers. And today was really an inspiration, watching hundreds of actions across the country in defense of higher ed. It's amazing and is a step forward for us. It's not where we need to be. We need to be really clear, but it's an important step forward. I also just want to mark my thankfulness for the leadership of the folks from the Coalition for Action in Higher Ed, for all of your focus and direction. You know, I remember going to a few meetings like a year and a half ago for planning for the first day, and I've just watched the leadership and direction of folks in CAHE grow, and it's what we need right now, as Barbara sort of laid out, and so I'm just really thankful for it. And I guess I'll just start by saying it seems like each day we wake up, all of us here on this call, and we wake up to some new and ridiculous, illegal and immoral attack that Trump and his cronies have done to undermine us and to undermine higher education. So we wake up and you ask yourself, like, what student have they abducted off the street in broad daylight? Or what hundreds of visas of students have they revoked? Or what revanchist position have they taken on critical race theory or DEI or gender studies? What attempts have they taken to silence protest on our campuses around the genocide in Gaza as a prelude to silence of all protest and dissent? What cuts have they made to the NIH and NSF, closing labs focused on researching cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, infant mortality rates? What attempts have they made to undermine academic freedom and institutional autonomy with their political intrusion at Columbia and Harvard and many other colleges and universities through the weaponization of anti-Semitism in Title VI? And each morning, it feels like without fail, there's something new. Like just this morning, we wake up and Harvard, the ever so slight defiance, which they're going to end up sloughing off onto the backs of the most vulnerable Harvard workers. We know that's going to happen. But nonetheless, the most slight defiance coming out of Harvard and coming out of Cambridge. They announced this morning that they're going to look into stopping Harvard from admitting foreign students in collusion with Homeland Security, and they're going to look to strip them of their 501c3 status, inclusion with the IRS. It's every day. And it's important for us to remember that a lot of people have been marking history, so there's another history that we have to mark. It's important for us to remember that while the attacks on higher ed that have been taking place over the last 2 months, they seem unbelievable. But these attacks have been set up for us by 60 to 70 years of divestment in our sector, right? That has hollowed out the core of higher education. And we have to remember that hollowing out. That neoliberal attack on our sector is an attack that started politically and racially, right? It happened when people of color were getting access to free higher ed. It happened in the 60s and 70s at the University of California, at CUNY, at the moment when universities were the backbones of the movements of the 60s. So the attacks on higher ed, the pulling back of free higher ed happened at a particular moment. It happened when, in a racialized and politicized sense. So we have to remember that. And we have to mark it because there's an intertwining between fascism and neoliberalism that we need to understand when we think about this long attack on higher ed that's taken place. It was first politicized, then it became an economic and corporatized kind of undermining and hollowing out, and now it's fascism again. And we have presidents that walk up and can't even defend their campuses because they don't even know what they stand for anymore because of such amazing mission drift in our sector. Not to mention contingency and bureaucrats and all the rest of it. And I was going to talk about why these attacks, but I think Kathy laid out very clearly that this is part of an authoritarian attack on our sector, and it's a playbook. So I don't think we need to go into it. We know it. And so I guess what I want to say is, how do we respond, and how do we get to free higher ed? However we want to define that. I would define it in this moment as college for all, as work with security for all workers on our campuses, an end to adjunctification, an end to student debt, the right to protest, the right to dissent. And I would say that the only way we get there is through this crisis that we're in right now. The only way that we build the emancipatory horizon we want in the higher ed we need is through the crisis and fight we're in, particularly right now. And so I guess, I want to just close out by talking about what specifically AAUP is trying to do and how we want to do this collectively as the entirety of the sector. And we have to go beyond the sector. We need to be clear about that too. And so for us, we've seen that there needs to be a fight at least four levels, but let's just say 4 levels. One in the courts, and I'm thankful for Laura. She laid out one of our shared lawsuits around the deportations so that AAUP and Merced did it together. We have a couple other lawsuits, one around the DEIA executive order, one around the elimination of the Department of Education, and one both on Columbia and Harvard. But fighting in the courts is not going to save us. We know that. We know it's important. It might slow them down. We're not going to win in the courts. Another place we have to fight is we have to target places where the Trump hegemonic bloc is vulnerable, right? It is extremely strong. I don't want to undersell it. It's an extremely strong formation, but there are vulnerabilities. And so we need to attack those vulnerabilities. And that's in purple districts where he's attacking the material realities of people's everyday lives. That's in red districts where he's attacking the material realities of everyday lives. And to that end, we need to build a united front. On our campuses, that means that people have been talking about it, Levin in particular, wall-to-wall organizing with our students. The days of trade organizing where faculty are for faculty, grads are for grads, staff are for staff, students are for students is over. We can't move forward that way. And so we have to build wall-to-wall on our campuses, and we have to build coalitions. And so one other thing that we're building is Labor for Higher Ed, which is a coalition of all the higher ed unions standing in alliance, 9 international unions. There's more, but we have 9 international unions now standing together, which represent millions of higher ed workers. And the other layer in which we need to work is we need to organize. One-on-one conversations as people have been talking, meeting people where they are, which is something that I heard Kathy saying in a really important way. AAUP has launched something called Organize Every Campus. We're doing it for AAUP chapters, but we invite everybody to be part of Organize Every Campus. It's part of Jay McAlevy's online organizing program, Skills to Win. And then the last thing is we have to get in motion, and we've started that. We had actions on February 19th, February 25th, April 8th, and now April 17th. This is a beautiful culmination. Next up, we have May Day. And May Day is going to be much bigger than our sector. In fact, I have to jump off this call and jump on a May Day call in a minute. And I guess I want to leave us with this last point, which is days of action are not going to be enough. We need to be really clear, they're not enough to win. So we have to figure out how to escalate. We have to use the summer to train ourselves in direct action, in picket line training, in one-on-one organizing, in comm skills. And AUP with other unions are going to launch and put out a vision for that. And then we need to be prepared to figure out how to be militant and escalate in a disciplined way. If we are not disciplined, we will be wiped in a disciplined way in the fall. And so there's more to talk about there. We want to do this collectively. I'm so thankful for you all, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Todd. Really appreciate it. And given the fact that Todd just mentioned like heading off to a meeting on May Day, I did want to give just one moment. I know we only have 10 minutes left for like conversation, and Kareem is supposed to go as well. But please, Michael, would you take a moment and speak to us about from Labor for Palestine National Network and upcoming plans for escalating with power?
Thanks, Heather, and to everyone here. I will be brief because I know that we're almost at the end. My name is Michael Letwin. I'm a former president of UAW 2325, the New York City-based public defender union. And I'm also a member of UAW Labor for Palestine and a co-convener of Labor for Palestine itself, which was founded in 2004. And working with the national network that we've created, which began in this January of 2024 and now has 50 plus member groups, and is proud to be one of the endorsers of today's Day of Action, which really, has shown itself to be at the cutting edge of a growing wave of resistance to the Trump regime's, bipartisan, unfortunately, war on Palestine. So, just to be right to the point about May Day, for us in labor, we focus on the need for a rank and file commitment to the most fundamental union principles, which we put in this term, an injury to Palestine is an injury to all. And the idea being that, talk is not enough, that we have to walk the picket line to stop the genocide, and that workers have a unique ability to accomplish that if we're organized enough to do it. So toward that end, we are taking our lead, as we often do, from the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions in Gaza, which on April 4th issued a May Day call to U.S. unions, which I'm going to post in the chat here. And the essence of that call is, I think, what I just said, which is that while appreciating union, as I'm using their words now, while appreciating union resolutions and conferences, that what they're calling on directly, this is a statement to U.S. unions that they wrote, saying that, talk is not enough, that under the incredible genocide that is being experienced in Gaza, and of course is part of the Nakba going back 77 years, that they need meaningful action, and actually even reference the need for general strikes and direct action of all kinds in the United States to accomplish this. And I just want to read one brief excerpt from their call, which I think is so critical. And it says this: "We in the General Federation of Trade Unions in Gaza address this call to you on the eve of International Workers' Day, affirming that your struggle for workers' rights in the United States is inseparable from our struggle against occupation and colonialism. True labor solidarity is demonstrated through actions, not just words, and we count on your awareness and determination to take concrete steps to end this tragedy." So I was going to read more from their statement and from ours, but I won't do that because of time. So please do look at that link in the chat. And that statement has been endorsed by a number, or rather our statement in support of that has been endorsed by CAHE, National FSJP, and a number of other organizations. Now, to finally say this, clearly this moment, for all the obvious reasons, demands a general strike. There's no question about that. I'm in the UAW. Sean Fain talks about a general strike in 2028. We're not going to be here in 2028 if we don't have a general strike and major action sometime before that. At the same time, it's unlikely that we're going to see a general strike on May Day for all the obvious other reasons. And so the idea here is to do whatever we can, as you did today in the April 17th Day of Action, to build towards meaningful action across all these different sectors, and in our case, especially labor. There is going to be, or there are going to be May Day actions, even called, like in New York City, by the Central Labor Council. They're not going to be talking about Palestine. But many of the people going to those demonstrations are going to be wearing keffiyehs, are going to be thinking about Palestine. And it's our job, in connection with and in response to the call from the Palestinian trade unions, to make sure that we bring Palestine to every single event, as you did today. And to make sure that when unions get together, that there are the keffiyehs and the Palestinian flags and all the other support for Palestine, and the demand that Palestine be brought to the stage and to the demands of those events, although we don't expect that they will be in many cases, and will go anyway, but it'll be going to make sure that Palestine is uplifted. So toward that end, we invite you to endorse the statement that we've issued to accomplish this, or to move towards this, which I'm also putting into the chat, and to connect with us in general, with the Labor for Palestine National Network. We'd love to be in touch with many of you as you would like to be with us. And thank you again for this time.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate it. I now get to hand it off to Karim Matar, who will lead us out into the Q&A and close out our webinar.
Hi there, everybody. Absolutely magnificent. Thank you so much for the powerhouse presentations, Leila, Kathy, Barbara, Levin, Lada, Sean, Michael, and Todd. They were uplifting, they were inspiring, they were forward-looking, and they exemplified the qualities of solidarity and community that we need to cultivate right now. I'm getting mixed guidance as to how much time we have left. Is it 3 minutes or 33 minutes? And are the panelists able to 3 minutes? Okay, so we're not going to have time for questions, unfortunately. Asking one now will not do the question justice, but we're nice people. Please feel free to reach out to any of us with your questions. I just want to close out by quoting another CAHE organizer, our very own Heather Ferguson. She calls the Day of Action a day of creative resistance. We've seen this in the 186 plus local events, local actions that took place from Hawaii and Alaska to New York City, from Washington, D.C. To Washington State. They exemplified, they represented an intersecting local, national, and global collective resistance and collective mobilization for change, for freedom, for liberation. Creative resistance was also reflected in our attempts to reframe academic work as labor in the deepest sense of the word. This has been central, really at the heart of all of our thinking about a free higher education now. And creative resistance has been represented in the attempt to build coalitions, both within and beyond the academic sector. Of course, AAUP and HELU, as well as Labor for Palestine, have been taking the lead on this essential endeavor. And I couldn't agree more with Levin, Todd, and Michael about the need to create these academia, labor coalitions and connections to build towards a greater form of resistance. I think at its deepest level, our Day of Action is a collective manifestation of our vision for the future of higher education, a free higher education in all of the senses that Barbara so sharply picked up upon. Thank you all. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, amazing CAHE collective comprised of 34 people, including Heather, myself, Tracy, Bill, Jennifer Ruth, Jason Wozniak. And I'm so sorry. We're going to be here all night if I list everybody's names. So I'm sorry for not listing everybody's names. You've all been absolutely amazing. I have learned so much from you about organizing across these educational and activist spaces. And thank you all for participating in this momentous day. It's not the end, as we like to put it, it's the beginning. We look forward to seeing you on May Day. We look forward to seeing you on Nakba Day. We look forward to seeing you on the streets as well as on our campuses. Thank you.
Thank you all. You were amazing.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Very
folks. That was
grateful to be a
fantastic.
part of this. Thank you.
Absolutely magnificent. Every one of you, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
Great to see you all.
absolutely.
Get some rest, you organizers. Organizers need rest too. You do. I know you think you don't, but you
Thanks.
do.
Bye all.
Thanks,
rest in-
everybody. Have a good night.
Absolutely amazing, Tracy. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Kurt.
you.
Thanks, Heather.
It's nice to see you. Leila. Kif حالك?
Yeah,
Oh, she's gone.